If you love movies, you're in the right place, and that place is the Chronicle, the official podcast of the People's Movies. My name is Paul. I am the editor of the People's Movies and the co-host for this fine podcast, which is episode 44 of the Chronicle. As ever, my co-host is Clotilda Chinichi. How are you, Clotilda?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you. And what films are we going to do for this episode?
This episode we're reviewing Sinners and Warfare. Both out in cinemas now.
And there you have it, folks. We're going to review Sinners and Warfare. And for the first review of this episode 44 of the Chronicle, we are going to review Warfare, which is actually an A24 film, Clotilda, even here in the UK, which is a quite a rare thing. We usually do a co-host type of film. So who's actually in this film and who actually directed it? So let us have a look. So this film is it's, it's co-directed by Alex Garland. Alex Garland is obviously his last film is Civil War, which we did review here on the Chronicle. Just have a little look back at the website at thepeoplesmovies.com and you will find the actual review there. So this is also the reason why it's co-directed, because it's the first film for Ray Mendoza. And who Ray Mendoza is, he is actually was a former Marine, and he's been an advisor for Hollywood for over 20 years. And he's worked in many films. I believe, Clotilda, he actually did work with Alex Garland on Civil War, and he has worked in other
Oh,
big.
interesting.
So he is a veteran of the Iraqi War. And how to describe this film is quite tricky, but not in a spoiler way, because it's a what I do like about this film is that it's only 95 minutes long. Would you agree, Clotilda? It's like one scene. It's like a one take scene.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So we go back to Iraq. Forgive me in the name of the place. It's so we're set in one of these little Iraqi towns, and we see a lot of these soldiers, American soldiers. They're all working together to go into this house, and they make their way into the house by force. And there is obviously a family in there, and they take them into the house, and they start setting up, and we start to learn it's for reconnaissance. Just before that, there's quite a when I say it's quite a weird one. We actually start with a song. This is 2006. This film setting. There's a song for back there, a very popular song by Eric Prydis, "Calling Me." I
Mhm.
think it's a tune from Hall and Oates. No, it's a dance song, and you get to see all the soldiers and all beating away. They're watching the television and they're dancing away, and then suddenly there's no music. That's the one thing about this film. There is no music, as you know, music plays a big important part of film, regardless if it's a small film or a big film. It plays a very pivotal part of the actual film itself. Back to where this home. So as I said, they're setting up a reconnaissance, and what they're doing is they're watching around the actual little Iraqi town that they're in. I'll let you know some of the cast that's in this, because so you agree, Clotilda, it's a massive cast. There's a lot of familiar
That's
faces in there.
massive.
Okay, folks, you might remember in our last podcast we had a certain film, the greatest film ever. It was that great. I gave it 0 stars, and Clotilda gave it a very low 3 stars, and that was Death of Unicorn. And that starred one actor in it, and that was Will Poulter, who's
Oh,
actually in.
yeah.
Yeah, he's actually in this film. There's also Joseph Quinn. He starred in the last Quiet Place Day One, but he's also going to appear in the next the Fantastic Four film, which is out in July. There's also Cosmo Jarvis, and forgive me for this pronunciation if I've said it wrong. DeFaro Woon Atai. There's also Kit Connor, Noah Centineo, Charles Melton. So there's fairly young cast, but fairly well known cast. If I'm right, Clotilda, the DeFaro Woon Atai, I believe he's playing Ray Mendoza's actual part. Him. Would you
Yeah.
say that's correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And I attended a Q&A as well, and they talked about that a lot and how, he was able to talk to him, which obviously had an impact on his performance as well.
Yeah, because I listened to a recent interview. I think it was the Kermorden Mail and Kermode show on Sony. They spoke to Cosmo Jarvis and DeFaro, and they were all talking about the brotherhood of them and all that. And Ray Mendoza actually, what he did, because Will Porter's one of the sort of leaders of the soldiers in this, and he only told him what's going to happen. None of the soldiers
Yeah.
actually knew, and I thought that was fantastic way, and it made them alert, and it made them sort of work together and just be on cue for anything happening. But what I like about this is you don't really get told what they're actually watching, but we get to see scenes slowly through it, listening to the communications. DeFaro Wutais, his character, he's got the headphones on and he's talking to the other teams all around that are surrounding the actual house that they're in. And it's from this you get to hear what's going on. You're seeing you're watching all the other soldiers because it's a 2 floor house that they're in. Just watching just how they react to each other, actually what they're watching, and they're connected through their headphones as well. And then they start to get a bit suspicious that I think the locals know that the local soldiers know that the Americans are actually in here, and then chaos just happens. As chaos happens, also happens, they're trying to get, forgive me the name, like the tanks, they come in and rescue them because there's a couple of the soldiers are actually wounded seriously. This one thing about warfare, they don't hold back in the blood. Everything's out. The actual scene, there's actually two scenes this actually happens. First, ladies and gentlemen, apologies if anything, say a little spoiler for anything. Sometimes it's a bit hard to talk about films. We might have a little spoiler, so just be aware of that when you're listening to us. But thank you very much for actually listening to the podcast. We get one scene where they actually attack the house, and then there's another scene where they actually, when they're asking for support to help to get them out, when they do go out, they get attacked again. And I don't know about you, Clotilde, that was one hell of a scene, because when you look back, there's other soldiers there actually get injured. One of their legs actually falls off. Well, not falls off. Apologies, that sounds really bad. Actually, when they get exploded, and the leg just was lying in the middle of the actual street. Did I enjoy this film? Yes, but actually saying enjoying it, it's quite a word that I probably wouldn't use. It's an experience. It's an experience where you're on edge. It keeps you on edge to the minute, to the end. You're wanting these guys to succeed. One thing I really did like about this, I don't know if you agree, Clotilda, see, when it comes to wars in Hollywood like to sensationalize things. They like to Hollywoodize it, as I like to say, and say it was an explosion happens, like it happens in this film. It's 10 times more bigger. However, in this film, Warfare, they don't do that. Very raw. Hits you on the bone. You can see you feel the tension, you feel the anxiety of these soldiers. And you can actually see in their faces where we hear about a lot of soldiers coming back for doing their service overseas, be wherever it be in a war or whatever, and they've all got the PTSD because they see things they should never see there, and you get to see a slice of that in this film. And you get to see the soldiers, the team starting to fall apart a little bit. And even when support comes in, some of the soldiers, especially Will Porter's soldier, he's really, really feeling it at one point. So when Charles Melton, he's the leader of one of the teams that comes in, he sort of takes over. It's an experience to watch. Having no sound of that really helps the movie, and you feel that you're actually in there. So Tilda, what I'll do is I'll pass over to you if you like to give your views on it, if you liked it or didn't like it.
I am very conflicted about this film.
Yeah,
The more I think about it, and the less I like it, which I think is very me with Liz Garland movies. I mean, from previous episodes that I
yeah,
really didn't like Warfare. I think similar to this, my first sort of like immediate reaction was like being very impressed at the technical side of it, right?
yeah,
And the use of sound and all of that. Obviously, in this one, even more, I think, than Civil War. I think the more I sit with it and the less I'm convinced, I think in a similar way to Civil War, actually, it
yes,
feels to me too general, if you will. Like at the Q&A, Alex Garland did say, this is not just about the Iraq War. Obviously, this is about any sort of armed conflict. You could sort of think about this in the context of today's wars, which I completely agree with. But I feel like the film kind of like drives this point home a little bit too much for me. I think in something like this, the context is extremely important, and it feels like the film strips the story away from it a bit too much. There's very little references to what actual wars this is, where we are in the war, or when even. And while I understand the sort of purpose of making this universal, I also feel like it just makes it less relevant and less interesting to me because I think they had specified or like just focused a little bit more on the historical context. I think it would have been actually more impactful. And it doesn't take away from the fact that as an experience, it can be universal to different soldiers and
Mm.
different wars and all of that. I think for me, and that happened with Civil War, as I said, there was a mismatch with like his intentions and what I would want to see. I think he tends to be quite, I don't want to say apolitical, but just quite general and not go into the specifics of it because it seems like there's a worry that that won't make people sort of relate to it or it won't make it universal and all of that. But I don't think that's the case. I think that's actually a very big misconception because, despite the fact that a movie can be about a specific event, it doesn't take away from the fact that, history unfortunately repeats itself and we can
Yeah,
see what has happened then happen now. I think actually having the historical and geographical context would have made it even more sort of harrowing to think about, yes, that was Iraq, but think about like Ukraine or think about Gaza. I think it would actually been a lot more impactful that way. But having that said, I do think there's a lot of it that's very impressive. I also watched in IMAX, so the sound was obviously an experience. And as always, I would recommend watching it in the cinema, especially this one because it's such it's so good, right? And it's so
yeah,
much part of the experience, especially with the use of sound and it's all diegetic. I really love the first thing you mentioned when you open on the music and the
yeah,
music video and it feels completely out of place with what you think you're about to see, and then it draws it out, and I think that's incredible. I also really liked the pacing. I thought it was excellent. To me it felt like half an hour. I genuinely thought it was intermission rather than the
yeah.
credits. It's really one of those films that like has you on the edge of your seat. I was holding my breath, couldn't stop like looking at the screen. It was so well paced in that sense. And obviously you do feel the stakes are delivered brilliantly, which I think is also a credit to the actors. I think they're all amazing in their portrayal. Even, a lot of them don't have that much time on screen or that many lines even. But I think they're all very impactful and they all create a very clear idea of who their characters are, and what role they play in this film and in these events that we see. So credit to them. I also agree with what you said. Like it doesn't glorify, I think, um, Navy. Was it the Navy? I think it was.
Navy
But it
SEALs.
doesn't. Navy SEALs, yes, it doesn't glorify, the role as soldiers. It's actually very honest about the trauma that they're going through, and I think that's because a war veteran is involved, and definitely part of why it feels so honest and raw, which I definitely appreciate. But another sort of concern I would say for me, which I think goes back to my previous point, is that I also felt like it was extremely focused on the, American soldiers. Nothing wrong with that. But the more I think about it and the more I feel like this narrow focus makes it seem like they're fighting like a sort of unknown enemy, right? Faceless enemy. We barely see their faces. Except for the family that's sort of trapped with them.
Yeah,
But even then, we don't have their names. They barely talk. They are clearly shown without agency when it comes to that family. And those that have agency are very much portrayed as villains. I think in the sense that obviously they are shooting at them, right, actively. And I think it's done in a way that to me feels very American, right, without showing their faces, without even saying like really who they are, because it doesn't really mention it. To me, that's quite problematic because that's also paired with a very clear visual remark of their ethnicity,
yeah,
especially at the end. And I just feel very conflicted about this because on one hand, I do understand that this is obviously the soldier's perspective and exploring the very complicated dynamics of it and the fact that, perhaps they're not just faceless enemies would perhaps result in a different film. I also feel like, to me, it's very problematic to portray a sort of like white people story when they're invading, a country with an ethnic minority in it in this day and age. It doesn't sit right with me, and I think there, I'm sure there could have been a way to sort of like portray the trauma of the soldiers, which is, incredibly valid. I'm not saying it's their fault that the US invaded Iraq, but also
Yeah.
at the same time, kind of like hold both truths together. So the trauma of the soldiers and the fact that it's most definitely not their fault personally, but also acknowledge the fact that they are invading. Like they're not being shot at randomly. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think obviously it's very complicated. It was never going to be easy. But I would have liked to see that nuance. I feel like much like I felt towards Civil War, it's extremely black and white to me. It's like the Americans that we're following and therefore have empathy for versus the enemies. Know nothing about them. They could be potentially anyone. I think we're sort of past that, I would hope, now. And I think perhaps I also feel this way because there really aren't in general films that portray the other side, if you will, especially in recent conflicts that have involved the US. It's always about the US perspective. So yeah, I feel pretty conflicted about it. I do think it's a very well made movie, and the fact that it invites discussion is already something quite positive. I think there are better made films that sort of rarely, but there are hold both truths together and have that nuance that I was looking for. It's rare, but it can be done.
The one thing I remember at the start of the movie, it says this film is made from memories. So it's obviously memories of Ray. I believe it was
Hmm.
also memories of, I think it was Cosmo Jarvis's. Yeah, I did like it. Not necessarily saying a lot of people say this is a masterpiece, blah blah blah. No, no, I not to that sort of sense. I am not a big war fan. Just something it made this stand out, and maybe it's just because it was memory. There's talking to sort of visual effects. There's one thing that they do. Ray does. He calls a lot of these sort of attacks to help to support them, and that is there's one where the planes, the actual fighters, come down the length of the street, and they let off these bombs just to clear the street.
Hmm.
You see that I really like that effect. I think
Yeah.
if you're someone who likes the army movies, the war movies, yeah, you're going to enjoy the experience. It's a visual experience. Yep, some will say it's very immersive. It's Ramadi in Iraq is where it's actually based in. And the title card, as I said, it said this film only uses memories, so obviously it's quite a few of the soldiers. So it's sort of saying it's a recollection of events that went down in Iraq. I know I said that Hollywood devises these films. However, this one is a bit more raw. And what I liked in an interview, Ray said, I think it was Cosmo Jarvis said in this interview, was someone came out and said that was very authentic. It was for someone that was never a
Hmm.
soldier. How do they know it's authentic? You know, because obviously, yeah, I can understand where he's come from. If this is truly authentic, there's going to be some things due to censorship and things like that, and how dark and bloody war can be. Yeah, there's going to be that. It doesn't go into, as you said, who's the bad guys, who's the good guys thing. This is just simply a scene or a mission from Iraqi war. None of the sides I sort of saw, but I understand what you were saying there. Were seen as good guys or bad guys. Type thing. You never really learn why they're doing it while you're in there. Because
Yeah.
when you see what actually happens, you wonder someone knew they were there. That's when they get attacked. Just to sort of round up, you want to give your final thoughts and what rating you would like to give the film?
I mean, I think I started quite high with like, when I rated it as soon as I walked out of the cinema because it's so impressive and I, was lucky enough to see it. And I'm much where I think you can really enjoy the visuals, right? The visual and the audio aspect of it.
Yeah,
And then, as I said, the more I thought about it and the more I wanted to go lower. Yes, I'm still a bit conflicted about my final score, but I think to recognize the technical aspect and the fact that it's paced incredibly well from a storyline point of view. I really appreciated the acting, despite my concerns over the plot. I do admit that it's a very well made film. I think head and shoulders above Civil War, but we all
yeah.
know I didn't like that. Yes, I think I can confidently say that my final score is 3.5 out of 5. Yes. What
Yeah,
about you?
yeah. I'm just a little high. I'm four. I was really surprised at how much I enjoyed the experience of the film. As I said, it doesn't give the whole point of why they're in there and what they're actually doing. I think it's just the sort of comradeship of the soldiers, the Navy SEALs, how they work together when they're under pressure, what could happen when they're attacked. It's probably the closest we'll get to summers, hopefully, to what is on the big screen. So it sort of gives you the impression. Just I know a lot of people going about the soldiers, blah blah blah. That gives you some sort of respect for the soldiers, what they get thrown into as well. So I'm actually going to give it 4 stars. So you have it, folks. That's a 3.5 star and 4 star for Warfare. And for the final film of episode 44 of the Chronicle is Ryan Coogler's Sinners. So, Clotilda, would you like to tell us about it? Who's in it? And what if you liked it or didn't like it?
Yes, absolutely. So I need to start by saying that I'm a big fan of Ryan Coogler. I think, people mostly know him from like Black Panther, Creed. I think one of his best films is Forward Station.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's not the point, but I was so hyped for this film. And so excited to see him, do something new and original as well. But yes, the film starts in 1932 when two identical twins, Smoke and Stuck, both played by Michael B.Jordan, return to their town in Mississippi after they spent years away in Chicago working with the mob. Now they stole some money basically, want to leave everything behind, and they purchased a sawmill in Mississippi to sort of get to become a juke joint for the local black community. The sawmill was purchased from a racist landowner who may or may not, spoiler alert, he is, be part of the Ku Klux Klan. For sort of like the first half of the film is all about organizing this launch party, I guess, for the juke joint, so like the opening night, if you will. And they recruit people to help them with food and stuff like that. But mostly their cousin Sammy, who's a very good guitarist, and it's his first role.
Yeah.
He's played by Miles Parton, who I think is known for singing for Bruce, but this is his very first role in cinema, which I find incredible because he's so good. He comes from like church family. His father was is a pastor, and he's very much against Sammy playing music, but that's what he loves to do. And he joins his cousin in sort of like this mission. Now, I think what I'm about to say is a bit of a spoiler, but it's in all the trailers, it's in all the like promo material. They always mention it in interviews as well, so it might not be, but just saying, if you want to walk, fly into the movie, this may be a bit of a spoiler. Maybe. In Mississippi, there's also this very sinister figure, Remick, who's a like Irish immigrant, and from the minute we see him on screen, we know something is up. I think from like the very first shot on him, and he's basically going around and goes into this like house of a Ku Klux Klan couple. He seems to be a bit on the run because the this Indian group is kind of like looking for him, and he's hiding, and something's clearly wrong because as it turns out he's a vampire, and he's basically like turning this couple and various people throughout the film into vampires. They are sort of, I don't want to say like wanting to turn everybody at the juke joint, but they do show up at the party. They try to get in mostly because they're following Sammy's music. That's kind of like the inciting incident in some way because they're entranced by it like everyone else. And that's when they show up. And that's sort of like when it becomes a kind of supernatural vampire movie. Brilliant. I think what I really like about Ryan Coogler and what you see in this film is that it's about so many things. It's not just about like the fact that it's a vampire movie, but it's also like about race and violence and how it was a struggle just to survive for these black brothers in the Jim Crow South, and how like it feels like the entire system is against them, right? They can purchase the sawmill, they can purchase property and like do things right in a certain way, even if the money's stolen, and yet it feels like something is rigged against them. They can't win. They can't own the property. They can't sort of move up. It feels like there's always something blocking um their progression and their path. And it's in the form of the vampires in a certain way, and the Ku Klux Klan members. They're sort of the embodiment of this, what essentially is an unjust social system. But I think it goes much deeper than that. It's about like this truly system of injustice and systemic injustice as well. It's very historical, obviously, and it's also about like this, kind of tight knit black community in Jim Crow South. I think it's a good film. I absolutely loved it. obviously the music plays such a big part. Credits to them because they're not only, I mean, this is sort of ensemble cast, they're not only brilliant actors, but they also sing and play, and the instruments that they play incredibly well. Those that play, obviously, which is such a key point of the film. You almost think it's obvious, but I think it's quite rare to find actors who do both things so excellently. And Miles Carton is really an example of that. I still can't believe it's his first role. Also, I want to say Michael B. Jordan. He's great. If I didn't know better, I would have generally thought he had a twin that played the other brother because he's so good. Something that I really liked is that from the very beginning, the two brothers are very distinct, and credits to his acting. They're not like opposites. I think that's the trope that's very used with twins. But in this film, they're not like the complete opposite of one another. They're very much like a team in that sense, but there's some nuances just like in the way they speak, in the way each of them like moves as well, that make you like immediately understand who is Smoke and who is Stuck, I think. So credits to him for that. I also think it's the historical setting is done really well, from the costumes to the language used to, the actual set. It's legit, like generally feels like we're being transported back in 1932 Mississippi. I'm not sure whether they filmed actually Mississippi, but wouldn't be surprised if they did
Yeah.
because it does feel like a sort of time machine, right?
Yeah.
And we're running, we're going back in time. There's so much to like love about the film, and there's so much to say. I think it's it's one of those films that I think stays with you in the sense that there's more and more that you could analyze. I kind of want to watch it again just to maybe catch on things that I might have missed on a first viewing. There's also the whole element of the vampire being Irish and
Mhm.
sort of like I think there's a commentary there about yes, he's white of course and he hasn't lived in this like American racist system quite as much. But he does understand in many ways the systemic oppression that they go through. And I don't think that's quite explored maybe as much, but it's such an interesting parallel there. And one of those things that really make you think about what the film is trying to tell us and what maybe not tell us, what sort of like discussions is it trying to amongst the audience. I also find really interesting, this is gonna be fully spoilers probably, but like the way the story developed for the twins, it's hard to say like if it's a happy ending. I mean, in many ways it's not, but also I think in other ways they both somehow stay true to who they were. I don't know. It's very fascinating how they have very different endings. I think you could argue for both of them having a happy ending or a tragic one. There's a sort of like mirroring there as well because they think it's pretty obvious now, but one of them dies. So they inevitably, one of them has to live without the other. But at the same time, it feels like they both got what they wanted in the sense of like personal life and relationships, but then they lost each other. It feels like there's, wanting to own property and, play into the system, the very much capitalist system of the US, sort of made them lose themselves in this way because they lost each other. That's something that made me think of, a lot. And also, I think in some ways, you could perhaps see a commentary of like Ryan Coogler about his own filmmaking, if that makes sense. It's like this kind of pull between being an independent filmmaker, which could be represented by, buying the juke joint and doing their own thing, but also like falling into sort of like more mainstream cinema, if you will, audience, which I think might be represented by like the vampires and like sort of appeal of like being turned into a vampire in that sense, right? In the sense of playing into
Yeah.
this this world and mainstream cinema and perhaps even Marvel, if you will. There's so much I think that could be taken from it. There are I think many different sort of like interpretations of it, and I'm enjoying as well reading a lot of them. I definitely need to watch it again to sort of catch on all of details. I've seen some clips after, and there's like little like nuances and details that I've missed. I also watched it in Italian, so there's a lot of like the language use that I probably missed on, and I realized
Yeah.
that looking at clips as well. So I think that's another commentary, that the language of the people, like the people, the language that they're speaking, as opposed to does them speaking an Irish accent, I would assume, right? So I think that's super cool as well. But I also want to say, like I said, the music plays such a big part in it. There's obviously the blues, if you will, side of it, and the more of like Irish folklore music, if that's the right word, even.
Yeah.
But also the score is brilliant. The way it kind of incorporates famous sort of well-known songs and also original score is incredible. And I think it really carries us through the film. I know it's early to say, but one of the best scores of the year? I think so. It is to me. So yeah, I'm a big fan. What did you think?
I enjoyed it as well. I wasn't. I mean, when the first reviews came out, it's the best movie ever made this year. It's the best movie. I'm not on board on that sort of side of things. It had its faults, but the good things about the film stood out a lot more. I liked this Daniel Johnson sells his soul to the devil type element of the film, and there's also one scene when Sammy is in the juke joint and he's playing away. When he first plays away, and then you start to see all the musicians, the dancers from all around the world, all sort of dancing around them and down round all the people in the juke joint as well. I liked that. Now, they weren't always from that time period. That's what I really liked about it. But it was like a mythical string, humanity and music. There is connections regardless of where you are, and there is a magic in it. Not always some believe is a true magic. It could be like a dark magic. A lot of the sort of deep south and even this American, even to today, a lot of them see music as the it's from the devil type thing. I liked how they played in that side of things. It was just a great cast, and they had a lot of cast there. Jack O'Connell played Remnick, the English actor Jack O'Connell. He plays him. In the opening scene, well, it wasn't the opening scene, tell a lie. His opening scene, when he comes to that couple who, as you open the door, he opens the door to them, and you can see in there they've got the white robes for the KKK. You see him getting chased by the Native Americans. That reminded me a little bit of Kurt Russell's The Thing, because the intro starts with these Norwegians are chasing this husky dog, but you don't know what's going on there. And then obviously he runs into the station where Kurt Russell and the Americans are, and obviously the difference is Jack O'Connell runs to this couple's house, and then carnage sort of breaks loose. What I liked about that part also, as I said, the vampires is the fact that you don't always see them. Obviously, it's biting the neck or whatever. It's how people get turned into vampires. You see a little bit about it. You don't always see all of it. And it was at one point you were like, did this couple get changed into vampires? Until you get to the scene later on when they're going towards the juke joint. That's when you start learning, yeah, they are vampires. And as you were talking, obviously, about Sammy's music, it's a bit like the Pied Piper. Instead of the rats, it's the vampires, are coming here. And it was like Jack O'Connell giving them people false hope that he plays on the, I can take you away for that sort of racism, the Jim Crow tone of it, of what that area they lived in. I can take you away for that. The pain will be away. But he didn't target he targeted everyone. So it wasn't just one thing, it was everyone, and as in the music is fantastic. It's composed by Ludwig Göransson. I believe he actually won an Oscar recently. Ludwig Göransson, I didn't know until I heard the interview with Ryan Coogler. He was on WTF and Mark Maron. It's actually his old school friend. They both went to school together. And I believe he has done other films for Ryan Coogler.
Yeah, he did. What? Oh, I forgot. The one
Yeah,
thing he did for the station, but I obsessed with the film, so I think everybody was on it at one point or another.
yeah.
Um, was there one for Oppenheimer as well, or did I dream that?
I believe he did actually. I think he did.
Right? Or
Let me just see. I'm in front of my computer, folks. So I'm just typing in. Yep, he did. So that's when he won the Oscar for Oppenheimer. Because I kept saying, I know that guy's name. What did he do? What did he do? He won the Oscar for Oppenheimer. Yep. Christopher Nolan can see the talent he had. Coogler and Göransson are very close friends. And it's a very unique blend of electronic music and the blues music. I really like blues music, but I'm not like, I think I love comic books. I've always wanted to draw comic books. I've got notebook, sketchpad books around my room where I've drawn characters or notebooks where I've written about stories. And I love one of them, when I started listening to the Robert Crumb film, Crumb. It was he's very into his blues music, and that's very much the sort of music element of the era of that where this film is actually based. And you do get to see a scene of how the racism and that happens in the era, but you don't get to see the violence a lot of the blacks or the were considered the minorities during the Jim Crow era, violence against them. Because there's the one point when the two brothers, which, as you said, they did that really well to convince. But in the old days, when it was one person playing two characters, it was the camera angles and things like that sort of helped, or there were some just slightly different, just to know who they're playing. And yep, so there's one scene when the two brothers are getting into this town where they're going to set up the juke joint, where they get into the store where they're good friends with the owners, and they're the Asian owners, and that's Lee Jun Lee plays Grace Chow, so it's a Chow family, and we see there's like two sides of the street. You've got the blacks on one side, you get the white folks on the other side, but with them being, if I like to say, in the middle, they don't necessarily get the racism that the black folks were getting in that time, so they were able to cross over. But they still probably get the Chinese and Asian folks who lived in America at that time did get racism. Maybe not to necessarily the same level as the blacks, but they were impacted with the racism. I liked that sort of when they did show you it was like it's the same type of street, but obviously for depending on what colour your skin was. I liked that. Hailee Steinfeld had a history. She was in there. She had a history. You start to learn a little bit about the history of them with the brothers. I'm not going to say much more about it because it could be seen as a slight spoiler, their connection with the brothers. Delroy Lindo, he was fantastic in it. He was Delta Slim. He was like the kind of comedic element of it, with Sammy, he being the sort of more serious element of it. He was just sort of like that. He wanted to leave it was either his brother or his dad, I don't know, who played the minister. He wanted to get away from that and actually be a blues star, because when they took his connection to Smoke and Stack is their cousins. And he was sort of saying, Nate, as you said, they came back from Chicago where Al Capone was. And he was saying, is the Jim Crow up? I'm hearing rumours that Jim Crow's not up there. And obviously the brothers let him down nicely to say, yeah, it's up there. They're just as racist as down here. And I liked how it was a sort of slow setup of getting to meet the characters, know a lot bit about them, see Remnick, how he gets involved in that. However, there's one things that let me down. I actually think the horror element was the weakest part of it. The actual humanity element, when you start to learn about the folks who are in this, who the brothers get to help to set up the club, and they get involved and start dancing and loving it. The club, that's the stronger element. The experience that the black folks had during that period, was the strongest bit. I just feel at times the vampire side could have been seen as a little bit generic, because eventually it starts very good, very smartly. It also plays on the mythos of the vampires, but it slides slightly into sort of generic terms, and it was sort of slightly disappointing in that sense of thing. You learn just little things about them. There's also Wunmi Mosaku, who plays Annie, and she's got a connection with one of the brothers as well. And her, Delroy Lindo, they're showing you two sides of it. Delroy Lindo, obviously the drink. He's like you say, the storyteller of that part. The music and the devil music. Wunmi Mosaku, she is the connection with voodoo. So she's got this sort of spiritual side, and she slowly starts to tell him who it is it's outside the vampires and what we have to do, that type of thing. I really, really did like what I was seeing here. The film really picks up, as I said, on the cultural sort of daydream, the sort of reverie of it. Jack O'Connell chased by the Native Americans, brings that side in it, sort of things that would have happened during this time. The music's fantastic. As I said, it's a mix. As I said, I liked the bit where the dancers, as they're dancing around, and Sammy's playing away the music. It sort of show you the connection with the music all around. Another thing was when, obviously, the mythos of the vampires need invited in. That is there. And it's the point where Remick and the couple who are the KKK. They don't come. Yeah, they ask to get invited in. They don't come as in they're racist or anything like that. It's sort of things that the KKK members would have come out during the Jim Crow era. Respectable. They were very kind. They're there for the music. You can see they were, I don't want to say working class, but they were sort of the class level of the folks who were actually in the club joining themselves. And obviously you see them getting asked, no, you're not coming in, and obviously the horror starts. I really did enjoy this. It left the door open for a lot of other things. Left the
Mm,
door open for what happens in Chicago. There is, ladies and
yeah.
gentlemen, there is a couple of end credit scenes. I saw the first end credit scene. Sorry, I just shut the mic there. I'm not going to mention who they are because it could be seen as a spoiler. It involves three of the characters, and then there's an end scene that involves another character. I missed that one. I didn't realise right at the end. So it goes into the sort of Marvel side of the two sort of scenes. Fantastic movie. I didn't see it in IMAX. I did see it in the big screen, and I enjoyed it. This is a film. It's filmed in 70mm, and it is preferably to be seen in the big screen. As you said, the cinematography was fantastic. It was I forget the DP's name, cinematographer's name, but it was the guy who
He's
did
brilliant. Didn't he do? Oh, I forgot.
Black Panther. He did. He was a Black
Yes,
Panther DP.
that's exactly what I was gonna say.
Yeah, and that was one of the strong
Love the
points that
cinematography as well.
it's lots of elements that I can see why people were actually saying this is one of the best movies of the year. Yep, but also I saw a lot of weak points. Clotilde, do you want to see your final thoughts and what rating you would like to give it?
I also watch it on the big screen. I think it's absolutely worth to watch on the big screen because the cinema is just so beautiful, and also you want the experience of the sound as well. There's so many things that I think are just so striking. Stay with you a lot. I also thought there was only one post-credit scene, so I'm very upset that I was told that because I evidently missed the last one. But worst thing, I think the one I've seen, so the first mid-credit scene, is probably one of my favorite scenes of the movie from like a writing point of view.
Yeah,
It's gorgeous, incredibly well shot. You're right, it's the same similar as Black Panther, and Ryan Coogler does tend to do that, I think,
yeah,
working with people that he's worked with before, and evidently he's quite right because I think he assembled an incredible cast, which was especially hard because it's like I said, music and acting, but also very much of an ensemble cast. Like they had to work together a lot. There's a lot of group scenes it almost in a way feels like a play. There's from I think the halfway point, second and third act mostly.
yeah,
It's very much into one setting, right? We get really familiar with it. It's sort of like this cast of people that we get to know. It's where to me has that vibe of like a play in that. And I mean this like, in the best way possible. It's absolutely fantastic. I also want to say how refreshing is it to get new content and original films when it feels like most big films coming out and films that are getting the money are sequels, remakes, adaptations. And I think it's so refreshing that a filmmaker, granted, like somebody like Ryan Coogler, who has a ton of experience, but has been given the freedom to, create an original story. And by freedom, I mean like both, creatively and from an economic point of view. I hope it bodes well because the film is actually doing quite well at the box office. And I think it shows that audiences want original content. We want, these things that are not necessarily like a cash grab in the sense that they're bound to make a lot of money, but they're exciting to see and they're new. I think that's the best feeling ever. And like both films we talked about today are original films, and I think as we said, there's so much that they both touch on and invite discussions about. So yeah, I'm really happy with this film. Do I think it's Ryan Coogler's? Probably not, but it gets quite close to that. So I gave it a very enthusiastic 4.5.
oh, 4.5. I'm giving it four
Yes.
stars.
Okay.
I find it's probably his most liberating film since
Yeah.
Fruitvale. Obviously, the big guns get a hold of him. This is a big film, and this is Warner Bros. It's releasing
Yeah.
this. But obviously, what they've done is because he's established himself now, it's amazing. He's only done about 5 or 6 films, and it looks like they've given him the open book to do what he likes. Yeah, the music's fantastic. Some fantastic scenes. The cast is brilliant. Standout scene for me is the bit with the, I mean, Sammy's playing his music and he's playing up. That's great. Right there as well. It reminds me of Dusk Till Dawn. Uh, that type of thing, when it gets into the horror element side of thing. If you like that, you're going to like this film. So you have it, folks. That is Sinners. That's a 4.5 and a 4-star. There you have it, folks. That was your wrap. That was episode 44 of the Chronicle. Thank you very much for joining us for this episode. Just to let you know, Sinners and Warfare are now in UK and Irish cinemas. And if you live outside the UK or Ireland, just check your local list to see if the film is still with you. Definitely Sinners will be. I believe Warfare was out a little bit earlier in certain parts of the world. As in Clotilde, thank you very much for joining us. You like to tell the audience where they can find you on social media and anywhere they can read your reviews?
Of course. So I write for the People's Movies, naturally. Loud and Clear Reviews, Film Hunts Magazine, Movie Marker, couple more that I won't mention. Otherwise, we'll be here for
Yeah.
a bit. But you can find me on Twitter and Letterboxd at Films with Chloe. On Instagram, I'm at The Perks of Being Chloe, and I am on Blue Sky. I do believe my nickname is at Sky something, because I haven't gotten rid of that bit quite yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll find me.
Yep. So for ourselves, you will find us on X and Twitter at The People's Movie, Instagram at The People's Movies. We're on YouTube, and this is where you can find episodes of The Chronicle there. That's over at The People's Movie 1. You also get your interviews, trailers, and clips, which are on The People's Movies as well. Get down there and subscribe yourself over there. We're on Facebook at The People's Movies. And you can find the Chronicle in many of the popular websites you download your favourite podcast from. Podbean is my main one. If you're watching that, listen to this on thepeoplesmovies.com. I'll leave the link down there for you. So as I said, Podbean, please do subscribe to us there. We also have Amazon Music, YouTube, Castbox, Listening Notes, iHeartRadio, to name a few. Sometimes we'll continue chat over at the Chronicle Take 2. Listen out on social media and at the People's Movies for future episodes. You can find out about them. Sign up for our email newsletter. You will find at the link over at the website. You can show your support also for the website and the Chronicle at Buy Me a Coffee. The link is at the website. Share the podcast on social media with your friends and family. And if you're listening to one of the popular podcast sites that I mentioned there earlier, please do give us a rating. Because we are a small podcast, that helps us share with other people and gets it to more people. It helps the algorithms as well. Thank you very much for joining us. Matilda, thank you very much for joining us. Until the next time, enjoy the movies.